to the first panel of the day. I'm very, very excited to be here. My name is Aruna Balasubramanian. I'm an associate professor at Stony Brook, and I'll get my introductions a little bit later. But I first of all wanted to welcome all the CIFellows today. I'm very excited to see you all. I'm actually part of, I just heard what the name of this committee was, which is the Cohort Building Committee. And so as part of the Cohort Building Committee, I welcome you all, and also on behalf of my other committee members, Anne, Maddie, Foma, Brian, and Bobby. You'll see all of them today leading various panels. And today we have the first panels about planning your research career. This is going to be a little bit more informal than yesterday, so please, we'll hopefully have more times for questions later. We have two excellent panelists here, Ian Foster and Jim Kurose. Again, if you were here yesterday, you would have heard from them. But today they're going to talk about how they planned their research career. And this panel is a little bit weird in that I'm going to both moderate as well as be a panelist. So I will share some of my own experiences now and then, but mostly it'll be Ian and Jim talking about how to plan your research career. Okay, next slide. So we'll first go with the introductions. Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. So I love this program. I had a student myself of mine who 10 years ago who at a time when there were very few positions in academia was able to get a CI fellow, and I think it really broadened his outlook, and also, of course, kept him in academia, and he's now a successful full professor. This is a rather old picture of me, I guess, but that's okay.
My fault, sorry.
My fault, I should have. One thing you'll notice is your photos will get younger over time or something. Yeah. So I'm a scientist at Argonne National Lab and also a faculty member at the University of Chicago. So what to say in terms of introduction, first of all. So I undergrad in New Zealand, PhD at Imperial College. Not mentioned there is I spent 3 years sailing in between and a year working in a computer company, which was fun. I don't know how helpful it was, but so I've been actually at the same institution now for 30 years, which shows perhaps a lack of initiative, but it's been continues to be a great plan. And one thing that I don't know if it's repeatable, but my strategy, well, not a strategy, but what happened was I worked at Argonne for some time and then got given a tenured position at the University of Chicago. So I avoided all this horrible tenure track stuff. Anyway, enough of, perhaps we'll move on to other topics.
Okay, Jim?
So hi, I'm Jim Kurose. I guess you can hear me okay. I'm really happy to be here. And before I even introduce myself, I wanted to say a couple words about the CRA and the CCC, because when Ellen and Mark and Ann were talking about it, I realized that I sort of crank myself back 30 odd years and think about what did I know about the CRA, which existed at the time. And for me, again, it's a place where you go to find jobs, right? And you will learn through your career just how important an organization like the CRA is for computer science, for research computer science in the United States. And so it's an organization to keep your eye on as you go along. And everybody's talked about service. I'm going to talk about service some. It's a place where you can contribute and do a lot of good for a lot of people. And the CIFellows is one example. This is the second iteration of the CIFellows. You may remember we had, or actually you won't remember because you were probably in high school. There was another version. There was an initial version of the CIFellows that Ian mentioned in 2008, and I was involved in that. And then I've seen it from the NSF side when I worked at NSF, sort of the impact of this. And so this is an organization that does great things for the community, the CRA, the CCC, which is part of the CRA. They do great things. And so I hope you appreciate them as an organization, and you should thank the people, as Mark said, pay it forward in the future. So, okay, end of ad about the CRA and CCC, but they do fabulous things. I'm a professor at UMass Amherst. Like Ian, I've been one place my entire career. I love it there. And so I don't know if it was lack of initiative. It was just like, why would I want to go anywhere else? I think like Mark and Ellen, it's really interesting to hear people talk about their early careers, because when I was a professor there, an assistant professor, and I thought, what am I going to do when I don't get tenure? Unlike Mark, who said he's going to go into industry and triple his salary, I thought I'd go into carpentry and divide my salary by a factor of 3. But that kind of uncertainty that you may hear as a theme, it may look like people knew exactly what they were going to do and where they're going to go and all that kind of stuff. And honestly, I don't know anybody who that's their journey. So I've been a professor at UMass Amherst. I've been a faculty member there the whole time. I've served various administrative roles also, so I've sort of seen being a junior faculty member from the chair side, from being a dean, and I'm an associate chancellor right now. I have a great history of doing some administration and then going back and being a faculty member for another 10 years, which I just love. I've worked, one of my appreciations for the CRA comes from the service that I've done here in Washington. I served as the assistant director leading the size directorate at NSF for 5 years, and part of that time I spent working in the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the White House. I've had a lot of PhD students. I mean, I've been blessed. I'm going to do what Mark did and count my collaborators, because all of my 30 students and then all my collaborators and other students graduated them along the way, and they've just been such a deep source of joy. So you can look forward to that and imagine the joy and sense of the world is wonderful that you bring to your advisors. Don't forget about that. So my journey, I started as an undergraduate major in atomic physics, I'll just tell you quite honestly, I decided I wasn't going to get a job in physics. I worked on an accelerator and was building things and simulating things too. And I saw like the brightest postdocs in the world that I was working with, and I saw their struggle getting a job. And so to the great unhappiness of my undergrad thesis advisor, I said, I want to go in computer science and work at a national lab. And that was my plan. We're going to talk about planning, right? So
It's not too late, Jim.
My plan was to get a master's degree because I thought, I need a piece of paper that says computer science on it, and then go and work at Argonne or a place like that because I was interested in energy and physics. And I went to Columbia, as it says up there. Students often ask me, why did I go to Columbia? I don't know. My girlfriend at the time, who's now my spouse of 40 years, wanted to live in New York City. So she says, I'm going to New York. And I'm like, okay, I'm going with you. And where could I go? So I applied and got in. And I've been at UMass since then. So wow, that was a long introduction, sorry. But some of the things that we're going to talk about during the panel.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Okay, like I already mentioned, I'm at Stony Brook, and I was a former CI fellow. In fact, I was one of those people that got saved in the last round. In fact, one of the reasons that when Ellen asked me if I wanted to be on the CIFellows steering committee, I immediately said yes, because of like how awesome this program was and how it really changed my life. My journey, I was in India, in BITS Pilani, again, talking about planning. I had no intentions of doing a PhD. In fact, I didn't even know what a PhD was or what it would take. But I came here to do my master's at Buffalo. And I got really interested. And actually, when I was ending my master's in Buffalo, the only thing I knew was I did not want an entry-level software engineering job. And I said, okay, if I did not want an entry-level software engineering job, what can I do? And I realized that, okay, maybe I should do research. I enjoyed doing research, so I did my PhD at UMass. Actually, UMass is a fantastic place, like Jim says. In fact, I wanted to say this one piece of advice. I hate giving advice, but one piece of advice I have to give: go to a place that you actually like. Do not go to a place that's aspirational. Go to a place that you like. Every place I've been there long enough because I really enjoyed it. I went to UW for my postdoc. Actually, this was my CI fellow postdoc. I actually ended up being there for 3.5 years because when I went as a postdoc, I had a 3-month-old baby, and I was in a new place trying to figure, and by the way, by that time I was tired of my PhD research. I did not want to continue. I wanted to do something new. And so here I was trying to write papers in a completely new area with a 3-month-old baby and a husband who had just finished his PhD figuring out what he wanted to do. And so I decided I was going to be a postdoc for a long enough time before I could actually find my footing, which is what I did. Which is to say that actually a lot of the times, it's the timing matters so much in this area. If you're patient, if you really want to do something and you're patient, it's possible. So the other thing I wanted to say was when I was sitting, hearing people like Jim and Ian talk about, or even Ellen about how it was a struggle, somehow I never believed it. Because in my head, they've made it. Well, they can say whatever. I can tell you, it's absolutely true. I think everybody, they don't know whether they're going to make it, and it's a struggle. And if you feel that way, it's totally, totally normal, right? And I'm actually the least experienced here, so I think you can take my word for it. I started as a networking researcher doing my PhD. When I went to UW, I decided to basically reinvent myself, and so I started doing mobile systems work. But then I basically found my way back to networking. So now I do both. And in fact, now I basically do what my students want to do. They are interested in so many different things, and I just end up doing it. And actually, that's a shout out to interdisciplinary research. We're going to talk about this in a little bit, but yeah, okay. All right, so we'll get to, what we've done is actually, this was Jim's great idea, which is that we have a few slides which talk about a few points that we all want to cover. And then we'll open up to questions. So we'll start with the first one because this is about planning your research career. The question is, can one plan? So,
who's going to begin here? So, well, can one plan? I think having a plan is an excellent idea. I've never had one, I don't think. It's. Yeah, I think we started talking about this preparing the panel, and I assumed that both of the others would have had a detailed plan, and I was the only one who didn't. But it seems that it's quite common that one proceeds by serendipity, a wonderful word. I would say, the thing that the planning step that's most benefited me has been talking to interesting people and finding out what they're doing, and that seems to bring forward ideas that then lead to more challenging projects than you would otherwise have taken on. When I was a PhD student at Imperial, we had these, some collaborations, well, some visitors came from Chicago, Argonne National Lab, and they had this mad plan to build the world's fastest theorem prover by using parallel computing, which is very new at the time. We had a 6-processor computer, so that was, and I thought that was just so much, so interesting that when they offered me a postdoc, I came to Chicago and started there. And it was only because they came to visit that happened, and because I spent time talking to them and found them interesting and followed up with a visit and so forth. So maybe that's, I think, open yourself up to opportunities is perhaps the most direct planning advice I would give. Of course, there are other good things being pointed out on the slides here, which I think I probably should have done more of, but I haven't, and I encourage you to think about that. Particularly, I think, issues of work-life balance, which perhaps were not such a big focus when I was younger, but are so important. You say something for a while.
Sure.
Yeah.
It was really, when we were asked to do a panel, so of course we all said yes, and then the topic, planning a career, and so we had a couple of calls, and our first call, we're like, well, what kind of planning did you do? I told you my story, right? I followed my girlfriend to New York like a puppy, right? And wasn't planning to get a PhD and didn't know what networking even was at the time, right? And Ian told you that, and Aruna told you that, so we were feeling a little bit bad that, we're going to be in a panel and talk about planning, and none of us really did planning in that sense, right? Or knew what, laid out a plan that spanned a long period of time and then just sort of executed it. None of us did that. None of us really know people who did that. But what Ian just said about leaving yourselves open to opportunity, I think, is the really important thing. So I'm like Ian, I don't know whether it's just, because we're outgoing people or whatever. I love to travel and talk to people and work with people and have remote collaborators and stuff like that. For me, going to conferences was hearing about what other people were doing and telling people what I was doing and getting ideas, right? So it's all about just sort of figuring out what's going on and getting great ideas. So your planning can be a foundation for that. Think about what it is you need to do to be able to do that planning. And I want to say something about timescales in a second. You know, are you someone who likes to work alone? Are you someone who likes to work with other people? You know, what are the scales of projects that you want to work on? Do you want to do, you know, in some ways, there's not even a line between, for me anyway, between service and, you know, leadership and service and planning and research, right? Because everyone's part of the same research community, and sometimes you get into great conversation. I got into a great conversation yesterday, got a great research idea from someone. I wasn't here to do research, but this is the way it happens. I think maybe the one piece of advice we could give you that I think we all agree on is this issue of this second bullet here, that there are some natural timescales, right? First thing, you can't plan super long term, but you can plan. And I'll tell you this as a department chair and a dean, you know, that if you go into academia, you really have to focus on what's going to happen after 6 years. And you heard everybody, you know, talk about that. So that's a sort of a natural planning timescale for the first part of your career. And a lot of people just sort of define it that way. Well, before I got tenure, I was doing this, right? Or before I got my PhD, I was doing this, and then I decided I was going to do that. And I'll tell you, getting tenure is like, it's a door, right? After that, after I got tenure, I said, I don't care what anybody else thinks, right? I was advised not to collaborate as much as I did, right? So, well, you want to become a full professor, don't collaborate as much. One of my mentors told me that. I just decided, I don't want to do that. And so I didn't do that. So, you know, I think there are, people have talked about work-life balance. You have kids. It just, I mean, that has to affect your planning, right? You can't travel as much. You know, your priorities in life start to shift and things like that. And so, you know, I think you just sort of, the planning works itself around what's going on in your life and sort of some natural clocking things that happen in the career.
Yeah, I mean, all great things. In fact, one thing I wanted to say was when I was applying for my PhD, I was so clueless that I had originally thought that I was going to apply to Yale because I was doing security work back then. And then I saw that the application fee was really, really high. So I said, okay, what other school is there near Yale that I can apply to? And I applied to UMass. It's the best decision, but whatever. Right? So I agree with what everybody said in that I think it's very hard to plan for a very long term because you don't know what's going to happen. Things are going to change. But I think that it's useful to have like what your values are and make sure that whatever you're doing, what decisions you make, adhere to what your values are. I think that is the best way that you, and keep yourself open to opportunities. I think those are the only two things that you can do. I think I actually personally felt that even when I was pre-tenure, which was just 2 years ago, is that I did not like to do micro optimizations for things. For me, the main thing was that I had to have fun. I needed to be happy. And so, of course, like you can't be happy every second of your life. You're not a psycho. But thing is that on balance, I only did things that I was happy about. For example, when I was pre-tenure, people said, don't do so much service work. I did anyway because it made me happy. And so I think that would be keep yourself open to opportunities and have whatever your value system is, make sure that you make decisions based on that. Okay, all right.
Seems like an interesting question is, but as you're talking, I've been thinking about community. So you're all part of some community, which when I was a PhD student, I went to logic programming conferences because that's what I was doing, and that was, in a way, it was really interesting going to those meetings, and I met interesting people. There was the frustrations of, well, they didn't want me on their programming committees. It was annoying, and so forth. And then when I got to Argonne, I realized that actually there was more to life than logic programming, and I started getting into more of a parallel computing community, and it was quite liberating in a way. So I guess you all probably have this, I think, you might advise me otherwise, this challenge. You need a community to be a part of because that's who's going to value you and cite you and write you letters and so forth. But you also need to realize that the community you're in is actually this tiny little bit of this vast area of computer science and more than computer science. And if you're not happy there, you can potentially go to another community or perhaps bridge more than one, and that can be very, very powerful.
Right, and there's going to be a panel on making connections, but that comment on community and finding your community, and even in a super tactical sense of knowing that you're going to need a dozen people to write tenure letters for you, and getting to know those people and getting your name known to them is important. But maybe that's a later topic. Yeah.
Yes, I completely agree with this. The one piece of advice I got as well was that find a community and stick to it. And I think that's a good advice. But let's move on to the next topic, which is identifying role models.
Yeah, so maybe I'll start on this one. This was a slide I actually did for the CRA mentoring workshop a long time ago. Well, not that long ago, but and for me, and I think you heard Mark and Ellen talk about this also, the importance of mentors and role models, which are two sort of different things. So for me, something I've always done since I was probably a kid was somehow find people who are just sort of notice people who are doing things, and they're not perfect, right? There's some things but there's something they do that's just so awesome, and it strikes you and you say, I want to be like that, right? You don't want to be a carbon copy of that person, but there's something they do really, really well, right? And so here are some of my role models, right? And all of these have sort of different dimensions, right? I don't want to be president of the United States. I'd be a lousy president, but well, now that I don't work for NSF, I can say this actually. When I was at NSF, I actually took that picture off when I talked about role models because I have to be neutral. And I was in 2 administrations, that being one of them. But not the other. But you look for people and you say, and you don't want to do exactly the same way, but it gets you thinking about the kinds of things that you value and what success looks like along a particular dimension there. So all of those people there, one of them is my advisor. Most of them, a number of them are my collaborators. I've never met Superman. Somebody I've met in person a couple of times, but very senior to me and whose work and approach to research I've always admired. So I would just encourage you to go out and identify role models, and I think it was Mark and maybe Ellen also talking about finding a mentor, right? Oh, it was Ellen, right? Because Ellen was assigned a mentor. You don't have to take an assigned mentor, but find a mentor, right? And realize that you can mentor people, right? You can mentor, as soon as you're a second year, as soon as you've done something for a year, you can mentor people who are, 1 year behind you, and that's just incredibly valuable. And folks want to, Ian?
Yeah, so I was just going to say you might have met Superman, but you just didn't. He wasn't in his disguise. So
there are no phone booths anymore, right? So I don't even know where.
Yeah, that's right. They just removed the last phone booth in New York. I read. So Superman is in trouble. Yeah, no, I'm trying to think. I mean, I don't know about this mentoring thing because it wasn't a thing when I was younger, and I'm a reserved New Zealander. But it sounds like a really good idea. I agree. But role models, definitely. I mean, I had the fortune of working with a fellow called Manny Chandy when I was much younger. And it was just wonderful to see this fellow who would sort of go off in crazy directions and do something really ambitious and then find a way to translate that into methods or tools that lots of people would use. And that certainly was very influential in the way I thought about it.
He's a role model once removed from me. So one of the people there, Manny, was his thesis advisor.
Okay, which one?
Don Towsley.
Okay, yes, right. Well,
top middle.
Don is a wonderful fellow too. Yeah, right. So yeah, I think really interesting to, more generally, just to study, well, how do people make careers in academia? And of course, they do things like, they write papers, they go to conferences, they get tenure, but more what motivates them, I think is really interesting to understand.
Yeah, I don't have much to add except one piece of advice I heard before was that you may not have, you don't need to have just one role model because you have to have multiple role models each for a different thing that you're going through at any time. And I found that to be a great advice because you take certain things, people contain multitudes. Take certain things from everybody, and it's always good. And also, it's great to be inspired, right? That's why we do research, because we are inspired. I'm inspired by a lot of people who have more experience, people who are my colleagues, people who are students, just because how nicely they work. And it's always, I don't know, it keeps us alive, I think, to be inspired on an everyday life. So, okay.
Not all things you learn from role models apply. I mean, Manny was famous and wonderful, skillful in handwritten slides. So that's not something that we've had to pass on, but it was impressive.
Okay, so the next topic is about choosing and defining a research problem. I'm sure this comes up a lot, and it's very important when you want to build your research career to do this carefully. But does anybody want to go first?
You go first.
I'll go for the next one.
Okay. Who's going first? I can go, or you go.
Oh, I wanted to do the next one.
Okay.
Oh, what is the next one?
Let me say a couple of things while they debate among themselves as to who's first. What was I going to?
We should have planned.
We did plan, but we then forgot what the plan was. I think that was the issue. I mean, I didn't know I did not know that this is what I was doing, but I think an article that Manish Parashar and David Abramson wrote recently about it really I crystallized for me an important idea. They wrote a paper about translational research in computer science. In medicine, translational research is when, well, I won't go into the details, but I encourage you to look at the letter, at the article. But trying to understand, for me, often, for various reasons, problems in the sciences, understand what are the real problems that people are facing, and then abstracting out problems, computer science problems that need to be addressed, or at least are inspired by these practical problems of people in the sciences. I found a very useful process because at least you know that one person will be interested in whatever you produce. And then the other thing and this is a very personal thing, but trying to find out how you can build tools that will implement the solution to whatever problem you're trying to solve, which has the benefit, if people start using your tools, then you've got people who are going to give you feedback and will care about what you're doing. So those are two approaches I've taken: translational, applied problems, and then tool building. Those are very personal. It wouldn't apply to many people, or perhaps certainly not to everyone.
I would say this question of how to pick research problems is the most important question you have to ask yourself, right? Planning, building networks, all that kind of stuff is a little bit more tactical and skills you need to have. But fundamentally, I mean, when you're doing research, it's what problems are you going to be working on? And the question you should always ask yourself is, why am I working on this particular problem? We're all smart enough that anything we work on, we could publish somewhere, right? But you want to do something that really makes a difference. And again, thinking in terms of timescales, I think academia is one of the few places where it doesn't matter whether you roll this out in 6 months and whether it's going to be uptaken. I'm not sure that's a word.
It is now.
But the world has an incredibly short time span, right? And thinking about trying to think 10 years down the road is really, really hard, especially when there's a lot of focus on what's being hyped right now. But I think that's, again, a real important thing. When we were having discussions about this, one of the things that I think we all do is a balance of some things that are really super long-term, and we're doing it, who knows if anybody's interested in it, but, and then other things that we see, oh yeah, we could see the use of this in, almost already, and there's a need for that. So I think we've all tried to strike a balance between those two. Yeah,
exactly. So one thing that has helped me is, I heard somebody say this, and I don't remember who it was, but is to not go for low-hanging fruits. And actually, I find that to be very useful advice, because whatever you work on, if you do it deep enough, it's not going to go out, right? Like that whatever work you did is going to follow you, no matter what you work on later. So I've always found that it's okay to spend that time understanding the area well enough before you start publishing. I think sometimes we don't have that leeway, and which is why we need these kinds of like a lot of things on your portfolio where there are certain things that you're doing, which I call cash cows, which is basically, okay, I know this area well enough now that, and it's interesting still for me that I can do this, I can publish, but then I can start doing something completely new. And it helps you keep this balance.
Right. And you use the word portfolio, which I think is a super great word, right? Because you're going to have, you may well have multiple projects going on at the same time, and you've got to have, sort of a balance. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. At NSF, all the program managers there talk about the portfolios that they have, right? Because it's never the case that all your eggs are in, it's just going to be this particular area where I, as a program director, are going to be, in this narrow area because that's the future. You have to maintain a portfolio, and I think we all do that in our research too.
Yeah, and so usually it's nice to have one research thread that is like I have, for example, a research thread that's going on for a decade, and obviously what I do now is very different from where I started. However, I have a good understanding of that research area because I worked on this for so long, and my understanding has evolved over the decade. And so, I have a better way of thinking about things, whereas there are things that I'm completely new at, and obviously, I'm not anywhere close to the expert there. But still, it's good. You chug along, and at some point, you get there. But the important thing is to work on something that is meaningful to you, not, this would be an interesting incremental thing that I can do that I can publish at the next conference. I think that usually it might be good in the long term, but doesn't really serve you well in the short term. Sorry, it won't serve you well in the long term.
Okay, can I do the next slide?
This is the time one?
The time one.
Okay, that you can do. I didn't want to do that.
Oh, okay.
I thought I didn't hear
I guess
that was the
maybe
next
we just forgot the ordering of
Yes,
slides.
I forgot the ordering.
You can do one more click here. We just sort of do that whole thing there. This is going to be quick. Actually, I think we should speed up so we make sure we have time for discussions too.
Yeah.
So something all of you, I am absolutely sure wrestle with is this issue of managing your time. And this is one of the most important sort of life skills that you can, I mean, it's not just about research, right? It's about your career, your family, your life, and how you choose to manage your time, right? And I'll go all the way to the bottom. So I knew Ellen when she was a grad student, right? So she says she feels old. Imagine how old I feel. Someone telling me, I know who I knew when she was a grad student. But somewhere along the way, Ellen and I were at some meeting, and she said to me, oh my God, I've got so many things, and she asked me, because I'm more senior than her, I'm older than her, I guess I should say, how do I manage my time? And I said, I study this, right? And I read this book here, which was, for me, had a profound impact on me. It's very dated, but it's got some really good things in it. It's a very, very dated book. But so I was talking to Ellen about it and the lessons I learned. It's just an informal chat at a meeting somewhere, probably at a conference. And I said, I'll send you a copy, right? So I sent her a copy, and we're going along, and Ellen and I see each other a lot, and we're at another, I think we were at a CRA mentoring workshop, and Ellen put up this cover of this book and said, this book changed my life. And I'm like, wow. Because I used to order these books 10 at a time in a box. They were $6.50 a piece. And I got a signed original from the author and stuff like that. I mean, that's how much I like this book, right? And I'd order them 10 at a time, and whenever anybody would ask me about time management or they were having issues, I'd just send it to them. So I'm not recommending this particular book, although it's really easy to read, and you'll see what something very dated looks like, but it's got a lot of tips, and there are other time management books, but you can study it, and you can, they all basically say the same thing, right? Just about keeping your commitments, keeping lists, setting priorities, knowing what you want to do. I mean, it's all, you study computer science, right? You can study time management, so I just think it's important. And my favorite things they talk about are when you do things, make sure you're there, right? Sitting in a meeting and doing email and not paying attention. Why do you even show up to the meeting, right? I mean, sometimes maybe your face needs to be seen, but that's not that often, right? So be there, right? If you're there and not doing something, why are you even there? And honoring commitments, right? When you say you're going to do something, and it kills me when people say, I'm sorry I wasn't able to do that. I was too busy. And I'm like, yeah, sorry, I wasn't busy, right? So, you do have to honor those. You do have to honor those commitments. I think that's important.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I wanted to say on that.
Do you have anything to add?
No, go ahead.
Me too.
Okay.
Nobody's as excited about time as Jim is, so we'll move on. Actually, I do agree with Jim. We do have to speed up. So maybe I'll go very, very quickly on collaborations. This is something that I wanted to add to this, which is that I think a big part of a research career is your collaborations. You've heard a lot from everybody since morning about how many collaborators they had and how much enriching it was. And so I think part of your planning a research career would also be about collaborating with more people, collaborating with the right people. And some of the things I wanted to talk about, so I actually have this slide in a talk I recently gave at Mobicom about how I started from understanding why the cellular cell consumption was what it was, and then through a series of collaborations over 10 years, we're now working on sustainable NLP. Which sounds like two different topics, but they're basically the same thing. And the only thing was that I added external collaborators who are experts in other areas to this. Some things that you have to probably keep in mind when you're doing collaboration is, first of all, is you have to be clear about what you bring to the table. Because I think a lot of the times you can't even start the collaboration if your collaborator doesn't know where you're coming from, or why is it that you need to be on this project, or why they need to be on this project. And that's harder than you think, because when you're starting a project, you yourself don't have a very clear idea of what it is that you want to do. So this is important. The other one is actually to be generous with both your time and credit, especially with like undergraduate students, graduate students who work on this. Just be generous with giving them credit. Be patient. It will be hard. Actually, yesterday there was a panel where, who was it? They said something about how Margaret Martinozzi apparently said about interdisciplinary research is about taking turns, right? And that was such a nice phrase. It absolutely is taking turns. You get something done, and then your collaborators, it's their time to shine, and they do something, and then you get it back. And it sometimes just talking the same language is hard, and it takes time, but be patient. It's worth it. Know when to bow out. I'm going to skip that in the interest of time. And deliver what you promise. This was something Jim said. If you don't, then people are not going to work with you. So definitely honor your commitments. Anything else you two want to add?
No, this is great. Good.
Yeah, I mean, collaborations. One thing I guess I'll say, especially for you as junior researchers, collaborations are great. The multidisciplinary research is great. I think when you think about the fact that you've only got 6 years thinking about timeframes and planning and things like that, if you're in academics and tenure, you do have to think about what you're going to do in 6 years. And so long-term interdisciplinary collaboration is great. They're great to have, and they've been some of the most rewarding I've ever had. I'll be honest with you, I didn't start those until after I got tenure. But that was just me. Yeah.
I did, but I think, I did quite a bit. But I think that it's because of the portfolio. Because I did have something that I was doing by myself, and then there was all of these collaborations. And it does take a longer time, but sometimes, like I said, you just have to do what makes you happy. So.
Maybe I'll just mention, there are good collaborators and bad collaborators, and of course, and so if you were working with someone and it isn't going well, just realize maybe they're a bad collaborator and you should work with someone else. And one nice thing about getting more established in your career, one of my students went to a workshop on established. No, I was right. Established. And I said, "What am I? Am I first established or whatever?" Anyway, so is you get experience with who is good to work with and who isn't. So just because if things aren't going well, maybe it's not because of you. It's just the other person doesn't respect you or just has personality difficulties. Yeah.
Okay, so this is the last slide.
Yeah.
About making connections. I know the next talk is going to be about making connections and networking, but maybe we can say a few words about this.
They're important.
Yes.
Yes, they're very important. There we go.
Yeah, okay, same. But so I think, maybe we'll let the next panelist talk about this, but yes, making connections is important. Serendipity is a huge thing in research. About 50% of the projects that I've done is actually just by talking to people and getting ideas. And so, this is a small community, so it's not that hard to know.